Welcome back to Small College Conversations. I'm Anthony Grassi. Happy to sit down today with President and CEO of the NAIA, Jim Carr. Jim, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, great always to be with you, Anthony.
So you're sitting right now, you guys are probably a week or two out of your NAIA convention that you guys had. What was your big takeaway that you have coming out of Kansas City?
I would say I had a few members describe it as just some great vibes at the convention. We launched our Right Way to Play campaign about a year ago, and so a lot of excitement around the progress of that and what we've been able to accomplish through that. And I think in that campaign, it's also given our members just a renewed sense of confidence and pride in the way that the NAIA comes at things as an association, the way our members operate their athletics programs on campus. And so I would say just a lot of positivity, and I guess an extension of that would be that we believe our current strategic plan and kind of the direction we're headed really is timely in terms of what's going on around us.
And one of the big news items out of that was you guys are adding 4 new members this upcoming fall, in addition to the 2 that you announced last fall for 6 new. That'll bring you around 240 total members within the association. How are you thinking about membership, maybe nationally, but also regionally, as there are pockets that are more, maybe easier to understand from a membership standpoint? There are areas of the country that are more challenging.
Yeah, for various reasons we can get into, but the strength of the NAIA from a geographic perspective has always been in the Midwest. I mean, our national office is in Kansas City and has been here since the 1950s, and just lots and lots of schools within a few-hour drive of here. A lot of schools in the South, and then we've always had a lot of schools out in the West, and now particularly in the Northwest. And so those, when you have strong conferences, when you have a lot of schools in a particular area, it certainly makes it easier to recruit new schools into those areas because they have a built-in conference to join, and they're really excited about joining with the GPAC or the Crossroads or Heart of America. You name your NAIA conference. If you're in the since we're 80% private, we have a lot of private schools that are interested in joining us. And if you're in the Northeast, that's dominated by Division III. So I just use that as an example to say most of our current membership growth are in those strong geographic pockets. We've had some discussions with trying to start a whole new conference in the upper Midwest and out in the Northeast, but it's challenging just to get 10 schools to come to a meeting, much less to get them all the way through a process to join you. So we haven't given up on that, but right now, as you mentioned, we're really excited about the 6 new members who joined us, and we'll be starting July 1 of this coming year, and we'll be joining existing conferences. And we're having many conversations, more than we've ever had in my 28 years, with those in Division II, Division III, but also 2-year schools going to 4-year, and then there are a handful of kind of developing programs that are in what we call our Pathways program to really, for us to help them understand what they need to do in order to grow their athletics programs, to grow their institutions in order to become eligible to become members.
Yeah, I want to get back to that where new members come from conversation in a second, but you mentioned the idea around creating a new conference. Obviously, you guys can play a very strong hand in that. How are you maybe thinking about the right distribution of members? Obviously, you guys can't necessarily dictate, hey, you need to move here and you need to move here, and you can't, play chess from your office here. But how are you thinking about being strategic and helpful from a national office standpoint for the betterment of maybe not necessarily just the current conferences, new conferences, but also maybe more broadly the membership as a whole, to put them in the best position moving forward?
Yeah, it's funny you say it that way. Play chess, I think, is what you said from the national office. There are certainly times when our members want us to do that. Typically, is when maybe they want to be in a different conference they're in, and they don't have an invitation, or they just want their conference footprint to look different. But as you said, we give autonomy to our conferences. We certainly can have some influence, and we want to be at the table with our conferences. But it is an institution's decision and a conference decision who is in which particular conference. Now, having said all that, Nick Davidson, who leads our membership efforts, sales, and both recruitment and retention, he's done a fantastic job of working with each one of our conferences. And by that, I mean essentially the leadership of every conference. I work very closely with the Council of Presidents representative, and Nick works really closely with commissioners and some with ADs and others who are leaders in the conference, to make sure that they're feeling like we're collaborating with them, that we're going into them and saying, let's talk about what you want to do as a conference. Where are you in a growth mode, or are there schools around you that you think might have some interest, and then we come alongside of them. Whereas I think if we're honest about it, in the past, sometimes it was more of the NAIA is going to identify some schools that we think might be a good fit in the NAIA, and then we're going to go find a conference to come alongside of us. So really trying to see it more through the lens of the conference and making sure they understand we're there for them. So while it's important to have a strong national footprint and to have, as you mentioned, around 240 members total, which really what we're saying to them, what we believe is that the most important thing is to have 20 strong conferences who can deliver all the services and the student athlete experience that happens on a daily basis.
Is there an optimal number of conferences?
I don't think so. I think just the number that can support our full membership. I think 20 seems about right now, but if the membership continues to grow, I know, and one of the things we're talking with folks about, we had and one of the ways in which we do this, we just had what we called a regional summit, regional seminar. Can't remember which name we ended up landing on, but the idea was we brought in 4 conferences that are connected to each other geographically, kind of in this particular case was in the southeastern part of the state. And we made it clear we're not coming together to try to twist arms and get schools to move to different conferences. But when you're in the same footprint, there should be ways that you're collaborating, or there are ways to schedule. They talked about having more preseason type events where schools could come together. But before we got on, we talked about the rising cost of travel. So scheduling and the cost of that, and as little missed class time as possible, are always top of mind for our schools. So are there ways conferences can come together and do that? But as we bring them together and as they get to know each other better, there were some conversations, not trying to get to a finish line or anything, about at some point, would it make sense to talk about whether the current makeup and the membership of those conferences make sense, or would some schools be willing to think about going to a different conference? So I think I'd get back to what I was saying earlier. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a collaborative way, and that we're serving those conferences as best we can and meeting their needs.
Yeah, I think this goes back to something we've talked about many a time, of where the association sits versus the autonomy you want the members to have, and they also want for themselves. We've heard some similar sentiment from, I believe it was Kaiser AD Chris Swager maybe a month or two ago, about conferences kind of getting in a sense boxed out of certain sport scheduling, given how different conferences do in-conference scheduling. I would imagine this is probably a big part of this is football, where there's more, or sports where there's less games.
Right.
Is there a hand in which the association can, obviously, again, autonomy versus maybe the association pushing it, that it makes more sense for the association to push people maybe to be a little more collaborative in areas where it may not be directly beneficial for that specific member, that specific conference, but it's better for the whole?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly from an influence perspective, having those conversations at the National Administrative Council that oversees all of our competition, but also as we're traveling out to, I try to get to, at least on a 2-year basis, every one of our conferences to meet with the presidents. And then we have staff members who try to get out at least once a year to all of our conferences. So in that setting, having those conversations around, especially with our stronger conferences, to make sure that they are at least open to having some non-conference competition to help those around them who might be struggling to fill some schedules. As you said, football is probably the most challenging. If you have there are some conferences who fill their full schedule with just conference opponents, so that makes it hard for those around them. But in other sports where there's a little more flexibility, I think we can have a little bit more influence. I think the other part of that, and I'm not an expert in this area, but how we set up qualification and how we choose teams for national championships can also influence what schools are doing in the regular season in terms of scheduling.
I want to go back to where new members come from topic of, there hasn't been as many NCAA members that have come over yet. Obviously, you mentioned you guys are in conversation with more potential new members than ever.
Yep.
The most common path seems to be either a 4-year institution moving over, but we've seen a lot more 2-year moving to 4-year and joining the NAIA path. Is there as you maybe look at the new members that are joining, the new members that have inquired, the new members that are inquiring, is there a kind of most common path that they are coming from?
Yeah, and you've kind of touched on them a little bit. I put them in three buckets essentially. One is those who are in the NCAA, either D2 or D3. I guess theoretically we could get a Division I school, and maybe the cost of competing at Division I is going to be such that there'll be some Division I schools at some point looking for a different home. But right now it's Division II and Division III. And the last couple of years we've had, I think, 4 Division III schools move over. I am not in a place to divulge exactly who I'm talking about, but I think in the next cycle we'll have a couple of Division II schools who are coming in. So that tends to be a place where we're spending a lot of our time. And right or wrong, I think it means more to our membership when they see an NCAA Division II or Division III school join us, because those schools clearly have options in the 4-year space, and that means they're choosing to come in with us as opposed to where they've been. The second bucket is, as you mentioned, 2-year schools going to 4-year. And we're seeing more and more of that. It's kind of on a state-by-state basis. But once a 2-year school starts to offer 4-year degrees, it's pretty logical that they want their students, especially their student athletes, to be able to stay for 4 years. And so we have a great relationship with NJCAA, and we certainly don't want to be poaching their members. But if they want to go into a 4-year space, it's a little easier or just less bureaucratic for them to come towards the NAIA as opposed to D2 or D3, at least the way I understand it. So we're getting a lot of schools have interest, and the number of those schools that are going from 2 to 4 seems to be increasing pretty rapidly. So that's going to continue to be a bucket. And that one of the great things about that segment is they've already shown they know how to run athletics at the 2-year level, and are, as long as they're in good standing with NJCAA and been running their programs, it's a nice fit. And then the third bucket is one that I think the NAIA has. I don't know if we have a responsibility, but I certainly think we are a nice resource and a nice place for those who, for whatever reason, over the years have not emphasized athletics on a national basis, or they want to grow the level of competition they've been in. Maybe they've been in the National Christian College Athletic Association or the USCAA, or maybe they just haven't even had athletics at all. And so I mentioned briefly we have what we call the Pathways program, where we're working with schools in advance to say, we want to come alongside of you, and we think you have potential to be a member, but these are the types of things that we need to see happen in the next, sometimes it might be a year if they're pretty close, sometimes it might be a 3-year period that might take them to come in. And we send people to their campus, we have regular check-ins, and our membership committee works pretty closely with them.
One of the main things I mentioned was a topic of conversation in your national convention in Kansas City was kind of the first year of the Right Way to Play campaign that you guys launched last spring. As you step into year 2 of that, what are the next phases of that, the next evolution of that branding campaign?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. First of all, I mean, the metrics and the results of it have just blown way past our what we anticipated, or what we at least set as goals for that, with hundreds of millions of impressions, and then just the social media growth and all kinds of things. And it's really a tribute to our members who told us they wanted to be advocates for the association. So it's really their activity that's driving all of that. So the next phase of it is really just to make sure we're continuing to energize the program. We just asked all of our schools to commit to a pledge, and through social media to talk about how they're pledging to move forward the right way to play. One of the things that our members are asking us to do, and what we're working on now, and I think we'll launch here this summer or into next year, is really being able to tangibly show what does the right way to play mean? How does that show up on a campus? How does it show up on a conference, and even at the national level? So I think that's in my view, the next iteration of it. And then just being creative with our social media platforms and the different things that our marketing department's doing.
As we look forward and what is ahead for the NAI, the Path Forward Task Force has a number of items on its docket. We can say, as we sit here, we could run through all of the major issues in college athletics for the next 25 minutes and probably still leave some of them out. What is the task force's focus, biggest priority at this moment? Yeah,
so in hopefully about 10 seconds, I'll rattle off the 5 topics that they're charged with looking at, and it's things that won't surprise anybody who's watching or listening. NIL, transfers, the ability to continue to enforce our eligibility rules, antitrust, slash commercialism, and then finally student athletes as employees. And those last two we'd kind of put on the back burner, just thinking that there was plenty of time that, or I guess maybe a better way to say it is NIL and transfers and eligibility rules were hotter topics at the time we started the work. But quickly, student athletes as employees became a focus for us as a staff, but also for that group because of some of the legislation that's going on in Congress, and really what could be pretty catastrophic results for schools that are in the NAIA and schools like our schools if student athletes were deemed employees. And I'll just kind of stop there with that topic. If you want to go down, and I can drill pretty deep into that if you think that's of interest to folks. But so we've made that a priority and done some work with a lot of work on Capitol Hill around that. But then the other is 5 seasons of competition. So it's in the eligibility bucket. And we had it on our radar, but when Division II indicated they were going to vote on it in January, it gave us a little more sense of urgency to say, we don't necessarily want to do it just because Division II is doing it, but if it potentially is going to be something that's going to happen in Division II, then we should at least be taking a look at it. So we were in a position potentially to vote on it in April, and then when Division II pulled their legislation, we decided let's send this through our more regular course and timeline of something this significant for our membership. So we said let's have it as a major topic of conversation at the convention in this April, and then look to potentially vote on something next April. Of course, right about the time we were set to do all that, then the executive order comes out from President Trump, and then soon after that, the NCAA is reporting that Division I is going to go through their more expedited process and potentially put something in place that I guess looks like it's probably going to happen, but hasn't, I guess, been finalized yet. That could be for Division I only, as the way I understand it, as early as this fall. So, feel like we've been in the spin cycle a little bit on this topic, but I do think even though this, it doesn't look like we're going to be the first to go to 5 seasons, I do think concentrating on what's right for the NAIA and our environment and our ecosystem and for our members is where we should be. And I think we needed that extra year to try to figure that out. So more discussions. We're in the planning stage of how we want to go out to our membership to get feedback and allow them to really, we're in the process right now of getting them to tell us what data are important to them around this and what are the sort of things that flow from 5 seasons that would be important for us to do more research on. And then we'll have that conversation into the fall. And then my anticipation is there'll probably be someone who want to bring forward some legislation for next April, but we'll see where that goes.
Between the speed at which Division I basically went from no, we're not doing that, to yes, we're going to do it in like a month. No. And, the changes that happened, you mentioned earlier this year between Division II doing it, you guys saying maybe yes, maybe no, amongst all of the other things, you mentioned the executive order that's set to go into effect in August. The SCORE Act is in somewhere of the House. That's, as we sit here right now, apparently potentially coming to the floor of the House in mid-May. The question I have for you first is there, I guess, how are you thinking about the speed at which the association moves to make a change to be responsive, but not maybe knee-jerk reactive in trying to move too fast? Yeah.
I mean, it's something we talk about often, both as a staff, but also with our leadership groups, because there's, essentially the way I think you were describing it is, and the way we think about it is, we want to be proactive. We want to be moving forward with some pace and with some sense of urgency to do what's right for the NAIA. And at the same time, though, we have things going on around us that could cause us to change either part of the path we're on, or to feel like we have to do something even faster than maybe we normally would in the course of our deliberations and the work that needs to be done to move an association forward in a significant way or make a significant change. So I think it's probably part art, part science. But the good news is we've been really working on that for the last, say, 5 years to certainly as a staff, things that we can do without needing to go to the membership and have a membership vote, putting things in place much quicker than we used to. And then I think the purpose of the Path Forward Task Force is that at least with the things we can identify now. And as you mentioned, we get potentially hit with things that are not even on the radar screen right now. But we already have a head start in those 5 areas, so that we're not starting from scratch if something new happens. And I think student athletes as employees was a perfect example of that, when it became a real hot button topic for the SCORE Act and a few other potential pieces of legislation that were going through. We were already not only on top of that topic in terms of having a position for the NAIA, but we had also done some legwork in DC. Chesney Salee on our staff was doing some good work in partnership with NJCAA. So we were already in conversations with the players in that space. At least, I mean, there are a lot of players in that space, but at least some who were working actively on that legislation.
Yeah, so I want to get back to the employment part of that in a moment, but you were in DC maybe a month ago.
Yep.
I'm curious, the reception that you've received in DC for legislators to understand the nuance of small college athletics, basically to make sure that we small college athletics don't get lumped into all the stuff at the Power Four, which I imagine probably also impacts the bottom of Division I.
Right.
It impacts Division II, it impacts Division III, NJCAA, everything outside of, which you could probably call the autonomy conferences, could have severe adverse impacts, employment being one of them. But I'm curious the reception that you've received to making that argument is what?
Yeah. So, I mean, the willingness of people, sometimes it's staff people, but at other times it's someone who is a representative in the House or a senator. Their willingness to meet with us has been terrific. I mean, they're busy people, so sometimes it takes some persistence, or you just have to work around their schedules. But we've had lots and lots of meetings for those who are interested in this space. I was surprised at how little many of them either knew or had taken the time to understand the world of college athletics outside of, as you said, the autonomy conferences or the Power Four, however you want to think about it. And that certainly is where a lot of them are getting their pressure from their constituents and maybe big donors. I know enough to be dangerous about politics and how all the inside baseball or whatever you want to call it works, but I know they're people who are influencing them who are also big donors of that space, and that's what gets most of the media attention as well. So that's where they get a lot of their information. But once we were able to have those conversations, you could almost see the light bulb going off, or just some of the questions they would then start to ask. We felt really good that they at least understood now that at a minimum they need to be thinking and asking a lot of questions. And that was part of the reason I got invited to the Senate roundtable that I attended in early March. They need to be asking a lot of questions about the downstream impacts. And I think that Division II and Division III, I think my assumption is and from some limited conversations, they share a lot of the same concerns or the same things that they want to make sure people understand better. But they're not really in a position many times to voice those things, because Division I is leading the conversation from the NCAA perspective. So I think while we certainly don't speak for Division II or Division III, partnering with NJCAA to speak on behalf of those outside of Division I and for those schools who are not driving a lot of revenue from athletics, but depend on it for enrollment and lots of other things on the campus that are not driven by hundreds of millions of dollars. It's something that we've gained some traction with, and I think is going to be a big part of what we do over the next several years.
We saw the president sign executive order. Are there any things that the association is considering, I guess, changing to accommodate what the letter of the order kind of says, assuming it ultimately does? Nothing changes from I guess an administrative standpoint, between now and when it goes into effect on August 1st?
Not as a direct result of the executive order. My view of it is that I think the biggest reason for President Trump putting forward the executive order is to send a message to Congress of these are the things I think are important, and he even said it as part of rolling it out, that Congress needs to do something that would be more permanent. And then the way the executive order is written, it really only applies to those institutions who are generating more than $20 million in athletic revenue. And so it's certainly none of our schools. And then it's directs the NCAA or the athletic association that governs those particular kinds of schools to do certain things. I'll let the NCAA answer whether the mechanisms in order to enforce it are such that they need to be changing their rules based on that. But I think there are certainly experts in that space who have said that the enforcement of it is problematic at best. There's not a whole lot that there's not. I mean, I guess things could be done to the NCAA if they don't follow suit or they don't change their rules by August 1, but the likelihood of that happening are pretty slim.
Yeah, and we're talking about what happens in 3+ months.
Right.
Enough's happened in the last few years that we know a heck of a lot can change in 3 months.
Yeah, and, I don't know if it's coincidence or not that they moved the 5 seasons rule, the 19 to 24 rule, I guess is kind of how to describe it, more quickly. Did the executive order have anything to do with that? They haven't, I haven't seen anything that said that was why they've decided to do this, but it could have had an impact, I guess.
Back to the employment piece. I know, we could probably go for 30 minutes just on this. What is your level of concern about the potential, obviously the financial implication, if all student athletes writ large are deemed employees of their institution, that completely changes the financial landscape for 1,000 schools across the country, at least, beyond the NAIA. I've seen some people that understand law much better than me, you included, who will say maybe the threshold or the criteria for a student athlete to be deemed an employee is different, basically because of the financial driver that athletics is at certain institutions, top of Division I, that NAIA school, a D2 school, a D3 school, that same employment criteria may not ultimately be met because of that being kind of the difference maker there. How are you thinking about the question of employment?
Yeah, so one of the reasons we're in DC was because it really became a sticking point between Republicans and Democrats about whether there would be specific language in some of the different pieces of legislation, SCORE Act being one of them, that would deem student athletes as employees. So that could be a mechanism by which it happens. It also could be just through the courts. But I would hope, and my belief is now, that that designation would only apply either, again, through legislation or through rulings in the court to those who are essentially getting paid to play in some way. So and I think that's mostly around Division I. Now there's certainly some collectives and some other things going on in Division II, NAIA, maybe even Division III, that might put some of those folks in a different bucket. But I certainly think there's a good argument to be made that if you're going to an institution to get an education, you're doing something you love, and that happens to help pay for part of your education. In most cases, we only have 4% of our students who are getting kind of equivalent of a full ride. Then it's to me a hard argument to make that those students should be deemed employees. And there's really the benefits that people talk about at the highest level, the protections for students who are playing a sport, making sure they're not in that sport for 60 or 80 hours or whatever the various things that a union or a collective bargaining agreement could help them with, just don't seem to be present in a very small level or very limited circumstances at NAIA schools. And so for what we're trying to convey to those in DC is that what it would do is put more cost and more compliance work onto our members. And for some of our members would make them call into question whether they can still afford to have athletics, or they're going to have to reduce the aid that goes out to students in order to cover the cost of the extra taxes and different things that comply with it. And for the students, it potentially could make their scholarships taxable. So those kinds of things just get us to the place where it's doesn't appear to be a positive thing for smaller institutions. I think the good news, and maybe back more to your question, is I think at least in Congress, people are starting to understand that. And I think there appears to be whatever legislation might come out would have carve-outs for those who aren't really in the revenue generating business. How the courts might come at it is not quite as clear, but I would be surprised if if courts would, even though there were some NLRB type of rulings a few years ago that went against this, but no courts codified that or ratified that. So I think the chances of those who are not making money playing college athletics being deemed employees is not great.
I want to get back to the association for a bit now that we've talked about all the major challenges that are facing college athletics and solve them all. You guys are in year 2 of your major streaming deal with Urban Edge Network and the NAIA Network. What has been maybe the impact so far that you've seen in growth, viewership, brand awareness, finances, et cetera?
Yeah. It's been essentially growth in all the things you just mentioned, growth and improvement. The deal with Urban Edge Network essentially allowed us to get out from behind a paywall that we had been behind since streaming became a thing, really. And it's something our members wanted. It's something certainly our student athletes and fans were looking for, and it's proven to do what we hoped it would do. I mean, it's sport by sport, but essentially growing our viewership in most cases at least tenfold, if not more than that. We men's and women's basketball for the championship game. I think it's kind of fun to say this on the women's side. We drew more fans than on the men's side. I think about 170,000 for the championship on women and about 130,000 for men. And so for that number of people, and most of those people watched a good chunk of the game, if not all the game. So just the exposure that we're getting, and then second to that, it's also allowed us to use some of those dollars to improve the quality of our of the stream itself, of the production of the telecast. And so that's been a lot of fun to see, and it's also allowed us to extend beyond, or to add more inventory. So earlier rounds of championships, and then UEN, another maybe separate discussion, but has also partnered with about half of our conferences now. So they're also getting the benefit of more exposure and extending the number of events that they can show.
And stepping back maybe to the association, what would you say is the financial state of the association?
Yeah, it's as good as it's been in a long time. We're in such a good position 2 years ago that we went to our council presidents and said, at the time we had about $7 million in reserve, and we said we'd like to use up to 20% of that over the next 3 years to do some specific things that we've really been challenged to do with our current operational dollars that we have through our regular budgeting process. And the main one was brand advocacy and marketing that we've just talked about. And so I think we're going to be in a position to probably go back to the council of presidents and try to extend that. The third year runs out after this next academic year and coincides with our end of our strategic plan. But we've been pretty good stewards of the dollars, so we haven't really spent all of the money that was available to us, or we've done better on the operational side. So the net has been better. So the financial position that we've been in over the years, and the dollars, the growth in revenue, but also good stewardship of the dollars, have allowed us to do those kinds of things.
You mentioned the reserves that the association has. How are you, and this is maybe a policy or procedure question, like how are you thinking about what is the right amount of money basically to have in that reserve fund, considering maybe the short-term financial implications as we think about, macroeconomic trends maybe, but also the maybe longer-term demographic cliff, Lord knows what happens in the future kind of questions?
Yeah, I guess I think about that in two ways. First, from the kind of the association perspective, our annual budget's about $15 million. So if you think 7 is close to half of a year, and so in some ways that seems about right in terms of where your reserves should be. I mean, we certainly could stockpile more and use some of the proceeds to fund new things, but you balance that with, as you mentioned, just the financial challenges going on in higher ed, and certainly at smaller institutions within higher ed. So I think one of the questions we're asking ourselves, and our leadership groups are asking us, is what's the right amount for the association to keep in order to move forward initiatives on the association wide, and then should some of those dollars potentially be use to help our schools in times where they're really challenged from a financial perspective. We get asked a lot about reimbursement for championships. We are reimbursing about $2 million a year back out to our schools, but it's a fraction of what they spend, and we get challenged because the NCAA Division II and Division III get a lot of money that comes down from Division I to do some of those things. So those are the conversations we're having. My assumption would be that we're going to continue to hear from our schools. It'd be nice to put some of that money back into either reimbursement for championships or some other initiatives that could maybe help conferences to strengthen themselves. At the same time, trying to make sure that the association is strong financially and we have resources to invest strategically.
Are there other areas where you're thinking about future investment? And obviously, the postseason travel reimbursement is a part of this. There's probably, student athlete experience elements of that kind of pop in your mind there. What are some of the areas where you're thinking about investing some of those dollars in the future?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned really the other one that comes to mind and we're talking about often, and that is I guess it's just kind of two related areas, but they both relate to our student athletes. One is, and we're already putting some of those strategic investment dollars into improving our championships, but improving the student athlete experience overall. And I mentioned conferences, and we've talked about conferences in a couple of different perspectives. So much of the student athlete experience happens at the conference level. So are there ways we can help our conferences in the kinds of things they deliver to our student athletes from an experience standpoint? Maybe it's doing some things to help them with their championships. But then the second part of it is association-wide. Are we doing enough for the health and safety of our student athletes? And mental health is talked about a lot these days, but there's also physical health, and we're there at every level. People talk about how it's hard to find qualified trainers and just the different kinds of things that you need on your campus to make sure that, in my view, that's just the minimum standard. What we need to keep our student athletes safe and healthy and as they compete. And so we're looking at some various things there. We've already done some things on the mental health side, especially with some new training for coaches and administrators and things like that, but there's certainly more we can do.
Does one of the financial elements of this that I've seen from the association maybe over the last year plus is that it seems that there has been an uptick in the number of partnerships that you guys have.
Yeah.
What is the maybe intent behind those, and those run the gambit of facilities, sportswear, tech that you got seemingly every time another one comes out? I was like, there's a new vertical I didn't even think about for a partnership.
Yeah.
How are you guys thinking about all of those and maybe the back end, like membership impact and the financial impact?
Yeah, it's a great question, and glad you're paying attention to our new partners. That's awesome. I know you guys usually put it in the ticker as well, so we appreciate that for sure. Of course, traditionally sponsorship, not just for the NAIA, but has been a way to generate revenue. About 10 to 15 years ago, we really made a concerted effort to try to reduce the reliance on dues. So we created a category in our strategic plan called non-dues revenue, and the Eligibility Center certainly helps with that, but partnerships are one of the main drivers of that. So revenue coming into us so that we can provide things to our members and not have to do it through raising dues is certainly a part of it. The second thing we try to do with every partner, in some cases we're more successful than others, is to say to the partner, one of the requirements is that they provide something to our members that they can only get because they're members of the NAIA or because of this partnership. And so the easiest one to think about would be discounts on whatever product and service they are, but others might be ways for maybe a whole conference to come together to do something, or just a different level of service at the same price that they're offering something less out to other folks. So those are the kind of two things we try to navigate and combine, because companies have to make money as well. So if they're going to pay us something and then provide a discount or a benefit, they have to obviously be comfortable they can do that and still contribute something to their bottom line. But the other part of your question, I think, or what you mentioned was all the various categories and the types of things that we're involved in. It used to be 20 plus years ago was, what ball are you going to use at the championship? And then what are the things that the athletic department might need in terms of facilities or equipment or uniforms, those kinds of things. But now we're really trying to provide companies with access into all parts of our campuses, partly because our campuses need help in a lot of areas. We now have a multiple employer retirement plan. We have close to 30 of our schools who are a part of that, so they can get better, essentially better service from TIA in their retirement area. We just launched a few months ago a new captive for health insurance and have a handful of schools in that, but we think that's going to grow. So to help take care of or to reduce the increases that our schools are getting on health insurance and other benefits. So those are I think a little more creative things, or things that people might look at and go, gosh, why is the NAIA involved in that stuff? But we see it as a member of the NAIA. We want to try to help them in all facets of campus, and anything that we can do to bring resources to the table. We think that's part of our job.
Yeah, and as you have maybe 240 members that can all play a role in that, the more people you have, the more entities you have to kind of pull together, as we've talked about previously, that there's value in that.
Exactly.
You mentioned the strategic plan a number of times that runs through 2027. What has been maybe the hardest or the most challenging element of that to achieve thus far, as you think about what is included and what maybe changes, tweaks are made for the next strategic plan?
Yeah, so our the 4 areas real quick. We have membership, recruitment, and retention is one. Member value. So why are members with us, and why would others want to join us? What's the value we bring to members? The third is brand advocacy, and we've talked quite a bit about that. And then the fourth is student athlete experience and development, and we just talked briefly about that as well. I'm really excited about the membership, recruitment, and retention I mentioned before, but it's something you have to really be focused on and stay on every day, just to get people to pay attention and make sure they know that NAIA is an option out there. But I like where we are and what we're doing in that. I would say probably the most challenging is the student athlete experience and development side of things. And I think mostly because with the resources we have available, there are only so many things we can do and do well. And so we have to pick and choose where we are. And then we also need to come alongside our members and be complementary to the types of things they're doing. And so we're making progress, but I think that's the area that we have the most work to do, or there's certainly the most opportunity to do more.
I want to end on 2 maybe bigger picture topics of, when we sat down last summer, you had just come out of a panel with leaders in D2 and D3, and we talked a little bit about the collaboration that can exist amongst those 3 entities. You touched multiple times on the connection you guys have with the NJCAA, as there's definitely a collaboration that can exist for the betterment, for the future of small college athletics. Are there areas where maybe those conversations, those entities can work together, or maybe are working together to better the future of small college athletics?
I think so, and we're certainly open to it. I think sometimes we certainly are in this place, and I would guess D2 and D3 leaders are as well. You just get so focused on what you're doing and don't really take the time to reach out. And we're probably competing more aggressively or more actively for members than we have in the past. And I don't know if that's might make it a little bit more challenging to then sit at the table and be collaborative, but we're open to it. And I certainly haven't given up on it. I can't say that we've had any meetings since that panel, but I'll be in Indianapolis some this summer, so I'll certainly reach out to my colleagues there and try to see what they might be open to. And we'll continue to work with NJCAA and have great collaboration there. So I do think we certainly have a lot more in common, and we share most of the same interests, I think, going forward with the things that we've been talking about today. So it makes a lot of sense to me, and I think we'll get there. We just got to be a little more intentional about it, I think.
And then what are we've talked about a bunch of issues over the last 45 minutes. Are there other topics that are of critical or importance to your membership, your association, that you are thinking about, that you are working towards achieving, that you are maybe just putting some brain power behind for the future positioning of the association?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is, and we talked about it briefly, but our members really value that they have a lot more autonomy in the NAIA than they might have other places, and so we're trying to make sure that we understand. In some ways, it's kind of an expectation in the NAIA, and when we go to pass legislation or think about legislation or think about our rules, people talk a lot about the impact on autonomy to our members of an association-wide rule. But we're trying right now we have a group that's taking a look at our constitution and bylaws and trying to understand like where are the places that really foster or improve autonomy, and then where are the places maybe where we need something different than just autonomy for each institution. I mean, I think there's basic agreement that we have to have some association-wide rules, but kind of unpacking our constitution and bylaws and really focusing in on that and what's the right level of autonomy, and then how do we need to be thinking about organizing ourselves around that. And then beyond that, I think it's what we're hearing, especially from presidents, but I think it's throughout the campus more now than it used to be, is that the data that we collect and the information that we can provide for institutions to understand better the impact that athletics is currently having, but could have on the overall institution, enrollment, finances, retention, those kinds of things, is something that people are coming towards us and asking more about. And so our Return on Athletics initiative is about 7 years old, but really focusing in on that to make sure that it's providing first and foremost to our current members what they need out of it, but also other things that we can talk with those outside of the NAIA about. And I think that'll be continue as a focus into the next strategic plan, but certainly something we want to work on in the next 12 months.
A lot of topics, a lot to look forward to. Jim, thank you as always for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anthony. Always great to be with you.